It's not recorded.
There
So
it is. Now it's recording.
there it is. There it is. So I'm going to go straight ahead. I've got a few questions here listed for you. And the first one I'm going to steal from you. Who are you and where are you from, Mr. Goodwin?
Things concede technology comes back to you. I described in our annual meeting, and I think I'll use kind of the markers there. I'm from a 16-year-old mother and a 17-year-old father who decided to hang out after school, and I came into the world. So they played hooky while my grandparents, who my parents grew up on the same block, their parents were at work, and then I was the result of their ditching high school to come home. I'm from a father who died of leukemia 3 months after I was born.
Wow.
And so a reality where a grandparent group sort of stepped in to substitute or be there in a way, because my mother, who was 16, was sort of going to be raising a child without a dad. And so I'm from my father's asking my grandmother, will you do me one favor, introduce my son to God? And that was sort of his dying breath request at 17.
Wow.
And so my grandmother kind of changed her reality, because she wasn't actually going to church at that time. She grew up in a very churched family, and decided when she sort of left the South that she was going to be free. And then here's this dying wish of her son. Nope, I want you to take my son to church. And so she sort of went to the church that she was familiar with, and raised me in that. And I think the final thing I would say, so I'm from my mom and my 5 sisters and a brother, and from that, and but I also want to ground, I'm from a conservative Christian church originally, who told me that God will only accept you if you do these 80,000 things. And so had to translate a God of rules to a God of love.
And
I think okay.
What state? Where were you? Where is this? Where was this all happening?
I grew up in Chicago, Illinois.
The Windy City.
Yes. And so that, yeah, I would say that's indicative of me and who I am. I think I think the phrase I've become comfortable with is a translator. I'm able to, especially for people who grew up in fairly conservative and painful religious settings, I'm able to translate those settings into this more welcoming, loving, and accepting space. And I say translation because I understand their language, because I grew up in it.
Right.
So their context and the belief system and kind of the key words that someone would use to entrap them in that kind of belief. I'm able to say, well, this is what's being said, and here is the direct derivative of that over here, and what it means about love. And so folks are like, oh, because if you don't understand the language, it's really hard to help someone see this other way, because they're rooted and grounded in a particular language, which the progressive Christianity doesn't exactly have, because that's not that's not the language that's used.
And so what does it mean to be an executive conference minister in the United Church of Christ, Southern New England Conference? I mean, what power does that actually give you?
So in a traditional sense, the conference minister is the person who sort of sets the tone for what these collection of churches in your particular region might aspire themselves to be. You sort of set the tone on what types of trainings you offer, what kind of staff engagement, what's the ethos of who we might be together as a collection of churches. So as executive conference minister, this is a fairly historic role, because the three historic conferences of the United Church of Christ, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, decided over a 5-year period to merge as one.
Right.
And so in their merging, it meant they would be the largest conference, the wealthiest conference, and the strongest conference in terms of their ability to change the face of the United Church of Christ in the US. And so there's a total of over 600 churches that effectively I will be helping to be the quote chief vision keeper, the ethos of who we might be, how we might exist in the world, how we translate our vision to be a transformative agent of change in New England, but for me, the world. Like, how will we be such a force that a child in London might Google something and find some moniker that comes out of the Southern New England Conference that reminds them that they're uniquely loved and accepted just as they are. I think that's the dynamic you have of a collection of over 600 churches, over 1,200 authorized members, and then hundreds of thousands of lay people in a particular concentration of a region. But what will that look like if those people were amplified towards justice? That's my job. That's what I'm empowered to
Towards
do.
justice, is this something that you're particularly interested in, or is this part of the remit of the job that you've been given?
I think it's both. And I think this is who I was created to be. And I've now found what I would describe as my dream job. So it's like everything, the things that I aspire, the places in which I want to push religion and faith, I've now been given a significant platform to be able to do so. And the conference reorganized itself with those commitments. Like, if we're going to form, if we're going to be this largest conference, then we have to be formed with justice at the center of who we want to be. And they were then looking for a leader who I think espoused the same values. And we began this marriage together. So we'll see how it works.
My next question was going to be, what have these mega churches ever done for Black folks but take our money? That was my next question. So do I have an answer?
Yeah. So here's what I think. Mega churches in and of themselves, I don't think that a particular gathering style is where the negative energy is. I think it's what you choose to do with a collection of all of those people together. I think, unfortunately, most mega churches are also conglomerated in a prosperity gospel movement, which is simply about you achieving and amassing as much as you possibly can as some sense of evidence of God's love. And so, yes, I think if that's your mentality, then it's have and have nots. It's people who are at the top and people at the bottom. It's people who have ascended and people who have not yet gotten there, but they're on the same rat race as you. That becomes a structural way in which to understand God. If you take the same group of a mega church and you put in the values and the ethics of justice and inclusion and faithfulness and siblinghood, then in effect, you have a large conglomeration of people who can transform cities, transform towns, transform states. I think the disconnect we're having is a giant group of people without the justice translation. It's a self-centric translation. I would say the tension that I have in my now call of these 600 churches is to aspire them to collectively use their voice, again, to transform initially Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut as 3 states that we cover. And then what is the type of policy development, social advocacy, environmental justice, racial justice, LGBT justice that is so then prolific in what these churches are doing in their local settings, that towns change, cities change, states change, and then the ripple effect is a nation and a universal change. I think that's my hope.
It sounds very laudable. I wonder what the kind of ethnic racial background of the majority of people in these churches are. Most of our understanding of these kind of mega churches, churches that are rooted in, a sense of amassing as much money as possible, is usually quite conservative and usually fairly white. I don't know if that's the case with the collection of churches that you will now head, is it?
Well, I would say the UCC in no way would be considered to be a birthing place of mega churches, because that's just really not the case in the United Church of Christ. I would say the UCC is a collection of historic churches, most of whom are probably more small to medium size. We have some large churches, and actually in the United Church of Christ, our largest church is Trinity United Church of Christ, and it's a predominantly African American congregation.
Right.
So I would say in the Northeast, in New England, because many of these churches are hundreds of years old, most of them are going to be white. Part of the historicity of this is I would be the first executive conference minister of a new conference, but I'm also going to be the first African American male to ever lead this conference in its history. Some of my older churches are over 450 years. Huh?
A history of how many years?
So it's a complex reality. The United Church of Christ is the compilation of three historic denominations that formed together in 1957. So the first iterations of the UCC is the Congregational Church, and the Congregational Church is derived from the Pilgrims when they arrived in the Northeast.
Right.
And so that's why most of our churches, the big churches that were formed in towns, are usually named Plymouth.
Okay.
Because of Plymouth Rock.
Yes.
And that sense of, so it's the interesting part is the United Church of Christ 1957, because that's when it was formed into its current history.
Right.
But they lean on the history of hundreds of years because many of our churches are 300 and 400 years old.
Right.
Where I hope, so anyway, that I would say mostly white. This is why it's so prolific that then this hundreds and thousands of white folks had enough consciousness, because I have to be voted into office, that the delegates of those churches would
By how many people?
There's so I think my vote had 572 delegates. So what happens is each church gets a set of delegates.
Right.
And then those delegates come to a meeting to vote on behalf of the church's body. So out of 600 something churches, 572 delegates would mean that either some churches didn't have delegates or they couldn't get, however that was. But technically, it should be a vote of at least 600 plus people to get 100% of affirmation, because each church has delegates.
Of which you had 98% of the votes.
Yes.
With a few abstentions.
One abstention, and it was a person who abstained through the whole meeting, so I didn't feel so bad.
But how many other African Americans were standing for election, if any?
So in the United Church of Christ, but when you get to election, there's only one candidate.
Oh, really?
So they either vote you in or they start a search process from the beginning.
And so the search process had how many how many people possibly to be elected? I mean, you must have started more than your...
There were 12. There were 12 candidates, and then I made it to the final place to be elected.
And you were the only African American?
No, that I don't know.
Okay.
So the process and the search processes in the United Church of Christ are also confidential, because a person can apply for a job while they're still having a different job. And so you have that freedom. And so you don't tell your job until you become a finalist.
Right.
And then at that point, they do what we call a red flag check, where they then call your current setting to get make sure that you are like a legitimate candidate. And so you sort of move through until then.
And so do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement had any kind of impact on the voting or the consciousness of the people in making a decision?
Absolutely. I think that the United Church of Christ as a denomination, which is a compilation of over 5,000 churches in the United States. And then we have like the United Church of Canada and the United Church of the Philippines, and like there's some other connectional places. I would say a Eurocentric denomination rooted and grounded in whiteness in terms of like the pilgrim thing and all of that.
Going right the way back to slavery, in fact.
Right. So to have well, churches, even in our annual meeting, who profess that they know that their churches existed for 350 years because of slave money. Like I think a reality of that, for that foundation in the Northeast specifically, to call, I mean, to be transparent, a African-American out gay man to lead them, there's no other way that could have happened were we not in, I think, a critical health and racial pandemic where people feel physically sick. I think they feel sick not only because of what's happening nationally around the coronavirus, but I think they feel racially sick. Like this is something's wrong and we have to fix it. And I think part of their justice orientation towards a healing of this racial and I think white supremacist sickness was to say, how dare we not call or at least seek a diverse candidate to lead us. Now, I have no idea who all applied or what their backgrounds were or whatever the case may be. And I say that with a little tongue in cheek. I think the search committee was very brutally honest in saying that my skill sets were expressly unique for what they desired. So I think it's a hard question because it's like, yes, I believe they had a different consciousness. And I'm honoring the search committees saying, out of all the candidates, like you brought these particular things that we thought were critically necessary for the role. So it would be interesting, like if there was a white person who had the same skill set, then I don't know, it'd be interesting to see who they chose. But according to them,
Were you surprised?
I was in shock, probably. I think for the things you're noting, I think I was in shock that the power play dynamic here is prolific. To assume that, I mean, because this conference will have such a significant impact on change in the denomination as a whole. I think, I don't know, maybe part of me thought, well, they're going to go for a traditionalist view. It's going to be a cisgendered, elderly, straight white man. Because they're going to feel like, well, we're new and this is the history of the church. This person would be the better steward. But instead, they choose, I probably will be the youngest conference minister.
At what age? How old are you?
39.
Oh, 38.
So I think that's a bold move. I mean, I think even in the annual meeting, they said, this is a bold move. Like, this is a bold and historic move. So that, yes, I think surprised is how I would say I felt. And I applied because I had a sense that maybe my own faith, that my God was big enough to move historic mountains.
And was there a sense of right place, right time, do you think, in your applying for this post at this point?
Oh, I think so. I think professionally, yes. And I think the conference has oriented itself in such a way that it would make sense. The things that they want to do are, like you mentioned earlier, are specifically things that I am interested in. Who's not at the table when we're making decisions? What are the communities we haven't served? How do we be good stewards of financial resources, but in a way that brings about change? How do we be stretched spiritually and emotionally and nurtured in a way that gets us out of our head and moves us to our heart? Like, I think those would be the things that I would be the right candidate for.
And in what practical ways can the church be more supportive in a world of Black Lives Matter protests, do you think?
I think a couple of ways. I think the first way is economic justice. And so one of the questions I'll have for the conference right away is, who are the vendors that we utilize in our services? Who are the people that we contract with? What are the types of services? And then from my vantage point, the purpose of a conference is the conference should do some deliberative work that then impacts the benefit of the local church. And so say this is a small example, but if the conference's website provider are people of color, and then we're able to negotiate a contract with them that any church in our conference that also use the same web provider, gets a certain discount. And then, now you have these Black or queer or brown folks who now have potentially 600 more clients covering a span of 3 different states because the conference has been thoughtful. So I think it's about churches thinking economically. Who does our services? Who are we working with? Who are we employing? Who are we engaging with? And that to me comes out of a it moves us away from the white salvific understanding, where we're just going to give you money. We're going to write a little check and we're going to feel good. This is saying empower and actually stabilize economic realities in Black communities by hiring Black folks to do work that they actually are skilled to do. So you're not doing them a favor. This is actually their work. I think the second piece is about using the voices for advocacy. The United Church of Christ, I think, has been profound in its movement forward and protest, and a language I'd like to use is the uprisings in the country, from the statements we've made to the social justice advocacy with government officials to empowering local church pastors to be on the front lines, if you were, in the uprisings that have happened in varying cities. So I think that would be, so the economic investment, social advocacy in terms of actually putting yourself out there on the front lines, but working with your governmental entities and all of that. And then I would say the most important one for me would be creating, I think, places of spiritual respite. Can folks of color show up at one of these faith communities and not have to deal in the immediate with the white supremacist racial reality that we're living in? Can they find a brave space? I don't want to say safe space, because I don't think we can actually provide safety for people. I think we can attempt, but really it's brave. Can you be a brave space where a person of color can come in on a Sunday and not have to then educate the entire congregation about what it means to be Black in America or this world? That one's going to take longer, because it's about the equipping, educating those people at those congregations and expanding their own center of diversity locus, which many of them just have not had a leader or the impetus to move in that direction. And of course, I would be bringing a very different kind of focal point of that.
And do you worry about your own safety? I mean, you're bringing 2 dynamics. You're bringing the kind of religious perspective, but you're also bringing the advocacy, which can potentially be a dangerous position to be in.
Yes, this recently, since this announcement, my social media page, I would say I am blocking upwards to 30 plus people a day. Who have already started with, you're a fake pastor, you're a false prophet, how dare you profess Christianity, you don't have a right to it. Sunday, I woke up to my inbox being, you're a faggot, you are not a real Christian, so I copied some of those and sent them to my new board of directors and said, my invitation, one is prayer. The second one is for you to be thoughtful that you have now chosen to do a very bold thing, but the very bold thing also has very serious consequences. Consequences for the office. We have multiple offices. Consequences for staff who might be at the crosshairs of someone, and me, who for some people, I will become the embodiment of that which they hate. They hate Black folks, there you go. If you hate gay people, okay, if you really hate religion, I get to be sort of, from a identities perspective, kind of a perfect storm for a bigot or a homophobe or something like that to act out, and I'm already experiencing it.
And is the bigotry always around sexuality, or is it about, race, ethnicity as well?
I think for right now, the tender spot for people is going to be around my sexual orientation, identity, and my faith, right? Because part of it is like, how dare I profess faith if I'm also a gay man? Like, I think that's where the hot button issue is right now, because it's a place that I think evangelical Christianity loves to be in. It's
Yes,
for some
yes.
odd reason. Um, so I think that homophobia will be overt, and sort of an evangelical Christian understanding that will be overt. I think race will not be. I think race
Well,
will come
yeah.
into
I mean, they expect.
questions about my qualifications
Yes,
and
yes.
my background, and just tell me a little bit more about that. It'll come in that way, because that's why I think, race has to come out in a perfunctory way that you don't feel is as gross. But I
Yes.
feel like people who want to be homophobic are just going to use epithets and all of that. I don't expect any member of a church to say the N word to me, but I think that they'll engage with me in ways that make me feel like the word is being used.
Yeah. Well, and you are, well, obviously you can deal with that. You expect it. You can deal with that. You've put yourself in a position where you know it's going to happen. It's almost like being a martyr in a sense.
Mm. Well, I wouldn't, that's a strong word. I don't know if I would feel comfortable saying that word, because I feel like a martyr sort of, it's like a really great phrase that I don't know if Dr. King or who offered, that I want you to know, if I'm killed, it's not because I wanted to be. It's because this culture couldn't accept who God created me to be. I think there is a tension. A martyr, I think, goes out like, yes, choose me. I think for people of color who are just trying to live their lives and have them taken, I think it's them saying, I didn't choose this. This is what the world gave me. The other person I would say I walk in the footsteps of is my great 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 grandmother. Was a midwife at the turn of slavery, and she traveled by herself off into the backwoods of people's homes to deliver their children. And that's such a profound story for me, because for me, that means that somewhere in my blood, there's blackness that says I'm willing to do whatever I need to do to help my people, even if it means hiding out in the backwoods to get to my sister to help her birth this child. I'm willing to do it. And I think I don't hear stories often about my great great grandfathers, but I hear stories about these Black women who took exceptional risk. And so, in some ways, this position for me is me looking back to my great great grandmother and saying, I see you and I see what you did, and I want to carry on your legacy. And maybe I will have to go through some backwoods too. And maybe there will be people chasing after me, right? Because I'm sure there were some white folks who were not happy that this Negro woman was doing this stuff, and she did it. And so for me, I'm I am undoubtedly assured that there's somebody, multiple people, hundreds of people, who think, how dare this Black boy think that he can be in charge, and hey, this is the world we're in.
You take it with great humor. But how have you been able to reconcile your faith with your sexuality? And when did you know that you were same-sex attracted?
Mm. Oh, that's a great question. I think that throughout my youth, there was always an understanding that I had a particular openness to the same sex. I wouldn't even have said at the time, I don't think I would have even said like, oh, an attraction in the sense of, oh, I'll be with this person, because quite frankly, as a younger version of myself, I never quite got along with men. In that sense, there was always a tension there, because I was too into my books, or I was too into this. So I found with other men, there was always some sense of degradation there. Oh, you think you're too smart. Oh, he's a nerd. Or as I got older, then it was like, oh, well, he doesn't seem to be doing the stuff we're doing, so he must be gay, or he must be this. So I just never found a sense of, quote, brotherhood, where even if I was wanting to explore that, I would have had the option to, because it was a natural barrier that was kind of there. Um, then I would say graduate school. Yeah, probably not until graduate school that I've met a gay Christian. And I had never even, that concept wouldn't have even made sense to me at the
Black, white,
time. A
male,
black,
female?
black gay male, um, who uh, kept asking me to dinner. And I found, so I found this profoundly strange experience. This man who was super involved in church, very dedicated to his faith, knew that I was a minister at the time because I was a minister in graduate school. I started preaching at 15. Um, and he wanted to get close, and I didn't understand what it was about, but I knew that it wasn't just like, like I just want to have a friend. I was like, some energy from this man, I think is, but I found after multiple no's, because after church he'd say, "Hey, do you want to get to?" Nope, I'm busy, can't do it. I found after multiple no's, there was one day I just simply said yes, and he said, "Okay, I will come pick you up. I want to make dinner for you." And sitting at this man's house, uh, I it was so spiritual. Like everything about him, like all of his books were gospel. I mean, all of his music was gospel music. All of the books on his shelves were theological books. My head, I didn't understand what was going on, but I felt so comfortable with him. I felt so home. And at the time, he was my sort of first partner. The joke after that, many years later, was I think I went to his house and never kind of went home. After that, it was just kind of clear that I had capacity to not love the women who I had been in relationship with and be fully authentically with them. And I never felt like I was hiding something. I felt like I was trying to figure out this other part of myself. And then, yeah, so with him, I felt like I got to be a full person. He never questioned
What
my
age were
attraction
you
to
then?
women. Huh?
What age were you then? 17?
24,
Oh, 20. Oh
maybe.
my goodness.
Yeah. So about, yeah, 15 years ago.
Right.
So maybe 2020, no, 22, because that's when I went to graduate school. But yeah, so I thought he was fully able, this gay Black Christian man, to accept my faith, accept my sexual orientation in a way that I felt my first year of graduate school, I remember saying to my girlfriend, who was a Black woman, I'm attracted to men. I'm able to name that. I'm very much in love with you and very attracted to you. And I think I'm attracted to men. And I remember her saying, I cannot date a bisexual man. We've been together for 5 years, all of college and my first year of graduate school. And her just saying, I can't deal with that. Like, I mean, if it's something you're willing to pray through, work through, I can support you. But if you mean this, I
If you're
can't
going to
do it.
take action, she meant. If you're going to act upon it.
Oh, it was just for me. I told her I had no desire to act on it.
Oh, but
It
she
was
wouldn't
just
even entertain that you were honest enough to say,
nope.
wow.
And that was the rub for me, because at that moment, if you had asked me, I 100% loved
Oh,
her. Probably would have married her. We would have a family today. I mean, everything was sort of organized in that way in our lives. Our families loved each other. I profoundly loved her. And because I never felt that there was a sense of hiding, like I was actually gay, but I'm pretending with her, I thought, oh, well, I love her. I should tell her. This
hmm.
is also me. I think I'm 22 now. I believe this is true. It's no longer sort of some thought that comes up. I think it's real. And she said, "What, do you want to act on it?" And I said, "I don't need to be in a relationship with a man because I'm in a relationship with you. But I should tell you this is me. And I don't feel comfortable lying. So I don't think I would ever not say this. If it came up in conversation, I would say, yes, I'm attracted to men and women. Like, and she just said, "Oh no, I can't." Like, it just you want to authentically be this person, and I said yes. And he, on the other hand, never was uncomfortable with that I was attracted to women. Fully supported that. Fully supported my church. Fully support everything. So I just felt like this is home. Like, this is where I feel most authentically able to be myself, at 22. So
And
yeah.
how long did that last?
We dated for 2 years out of graduate school. And then I think the unfortunate part was I became more out than he was ultimately comfortable for.
Right, right.
So in our circle of graduate school with our classmates and our friends and that community, it made sense. He was able to be his authentic self.
Right.
But then this boy wanted to start preaching more broadly and having more, then it became a little bit more like, okay, I
Having,
wasn't
having,
ready.
having, having started late, you wanted to kind of make up for all that.
When my friends, the joke about my friends is that I never quote came out. That one day they came over and I said, "Oh, this is my boyfriend," and they were like,
Okay.
"Okay," because but that was for me. I said, "I am not. I don't have to come. I don't have to do this thing for you. This is my life, and so why make this strange conversation? You need to sit down. I need to tell you some dark secret. No, you're coming over to my house. My partner's here. I'm going to introduce you." And so my friends would say, "We never got to react because you diffused the reaction." It was like, "We're going on a trip. I'm bringing my boyfriend." Oh, great. Okay, because they had only known my girlfriend for 5 years.
Right.
So to then immediately, and it wasn't a conversation like I would be like, "Oh, actually, I'm struggling because I'm actually attracted to Brian." It was like, "No, I fully love her. This is probably my wife. And this is a
Yeah,
part of
this
my
is fun.
identity."
Yeah. Why not? But we didn't talk about the reconciling faith and sexuality, which I don't
Oh,
think.
so it was really, I would say, I wrote him recently because he's married to a wife and he has sons now, and he's doesn't consider himself to be gay anymore. But it was him
Sure.
because he reconciled everything embodied in his personhood. Like I said, he was authentically gay at the time, um, faithful, very involved in church, and seemed to have no confusion that he was loved of God. And it was just so profound theologically that I couldn't resist it. It just made so much more sense than telling him somehow that he was wrong or evil or somehow not worthy of God's love, simply because he embodied faith in the way that I have been told you should. Like, he loved God, he loved people, he was justice oriented, he would serve anybody, he would feed anybody. It was like everything that I was told a quote Christian should be. He was it. I just had not seen it in a person who identified as same gender loving before.
Right.
And so for me, there I couldn't well, it's a hard way to say this, but the reconciliation was that he was everything I was told a Christian should be. And so there was no cognitive dissonance because I didn't have to wrestle with something that I was told. Like, this is how a Christian should be. Oh, he is those things. Well, if he's those things, then how can we have confusion about his sexual orientation? It didn't work. The other thing is I was a theology major, in an academic sense. And so in that sense, most of my time, my freshman year theology class was about Jonathan and David and whether or not they were in a same gender loving relationship. Which for this conservative Black church boy growing up, I was like, this is blasphemy. And at the same time, I was writing an academic paper about it and justifying why there was probably something else going on. So I think the other salvation I had was an academic understanding of
Right.
scripture.
Right.
So it took my academic understanding of scripture with a real life example where these two things were reconciled, and then my personality of being like, if I'm gonna do the thing, I'm gonna do it all the way.
Wow. It almost seems as if you've become this gentleman. You've become, you're happy with your sexuality. You're happy with the religion. You practice what a good Christian should be,
Yeah.
and within your personality, within who you are. Um, how? I saw this video with all of these wonderful people saying these wonderful things about you and how supportive you have been of them. And I wondered to myself, where does he go to get support? Who does he turn to? Um,
So one of my favorite books on this is Parker Palmer, this author here, writes about having a circle of trust. And he says you should pick a handful of people who form your circle of trust. And they are people that you go to, that you confide in, and what have you. And so I think, probably against his wisdom, I have multiple circles of trust. But my freshman year at Boston College, which, was why I'm returning to New England, that year I met 9 people who are literally like my brothers and sisters. And I have siblings, but they are, if I had a second layer, they would be like siblings. Most of them, I've performed their weddings. I've been with them in the most difficult of times. None of them are United Church of Christ people. They all come from either other traditions, or they were Catholic, or they whatever, but they've always been my place to be Darrell. Like they've been to see me preach, and they celebrated this job, and they've tweeted, and they'll be there at my installation. But they are the people, those 9, that I am always Darrell. Now later, they'll be like, okay, we're going into this thing, we're going to make sure to say Reverend Goodwin, right? Because we don't want to embarrass you. But like when that thing is over, I'm Darrell. If I became the president of the United Church of Christ, which could be next after this job, I will be Darrell. And I think I love that these are people who've known me since I was 17 years old. Like they will know me until I'm no longer on this earth. And to them, I will always be able to be Darrell. And so they've seen me in the most, beautiful moments. They've seen me in struggling moments. They watched me through my girlfriend to this is my boyfriend. So they have always kind of been present. And then mentors and my family. But those 9, that's a well that I feel like I can always dip into, and fresh water is going to come up. And and they've been the kind of mainstay, even applying for this job, which takes months, by the way. I applied in April, and then it wasn't resolved until September 26th. And so they were the ones who, hey, did you hear anything? Do you need something? How can we support you? What's going on? Differently than maybe the general people.
mhm.
And some of them were in the video that I think you're talking about from my 20th ordination anniversary. Many of those of the 9 were in that video.
And,
And they know me.
and how's your grandmother?
She's fantastic. I'm trying to, at this moment, convince her that when you hire movers, they will pack your things. And she's every day she's packing a box, and I'm like, what are you doing? We have movers, they're packing the house. And she's like, well, can't I just pack my thing? She lives with me. Yeah, she's coming with me.
Oh wow, you and her together? You live together with her?
Yeah, I moved her to come and live with me 2 years ago.
Oh wow.
We're going on what will be 3 years next year. It's part of that was, in many respects, I think my grandmother's theology is that God, and I want to say this is her theology, that God may have taken her son, but replaced him. And I think because my father was so young, there are things that my grandmother is experiencing that in her mind she might have experienced if my father lived.
Right.
And so I think that even from a little child, I've kind of always taken on I want to be the son to her that she never got, right? So yeah, my grandmother is kind of she's like, I'm like 2 years ago, I took her to China for the first time. She experienced an international trip, so she had to get a passport and everything at 83. So it's just, we have these adventures.
By halves, do you?
That right? So, but she's fantastic in that sense. And I think I would add, she was also a part of my reconciliation. because she grew up very strict too, and it was really hard for her at the beginning to kind of wrap her mind around everything. But in another life, I was married to my husband, my ex-husband, and so she was struggling because it was, for her, it was one thing for me to say it, but then to act in this, like to be married, it was so different. And so one day, so my grandmother wasn't going to come to my wedding because she just couldn't do it. And I basically said, I love you, but I only want people at my wedding who can truly support this. I don't want any negative energy on this day. So she wasn't going to come. And about 3 weeks before, she called and said, I need the information and I'm coming. And I want you to know I don't want any help from you to come. I want you to know that this is on me. Like, I'm gonna get the money. I'm coming. And it was expensive because it was 3 weeks. It was from Chicago. So I'm like, let me help. And she's like, no, I'm gonna get the money together because this, you have to know I'm choosing this. And I said, so can you tell me what happened? Like, are you thinking I'm going to be mad at you? Are you worried about our relationship? Because, she never wants there to be a tension in our relationship. And she said, no, it's not that. I said, then what is it? She says, well, you're a pastor. And I've always asked God to send you help. And it hit me. I've never asked God for the type of help to send. And so who am I to be upset with God for the help that God sent you? And for my grandmother, it was faith again. It was, if I prayed and asked God to bless you, God has blessed you.
Who am I to question what kind of blessing he gives? That's quite profound.
It's something that I feel like is another well that I just feel like every now and again I just need to dip back into. Even for this job, the most profound story about this job is it's a very grueling process. You have so many interviews and so many people, and they do all. It's just, that's why it takes months. And so I was not discouraged, but I was kind of like, oh, I was getting, it was like month 3, and I still had another interview and another. And my grandmother was home from a back surgery she had, and she had ordered this something online, and she had to go back to the hospital because she wasn't really recovering well. And I said, let's go. We got to go there. The emergency room was waiting on us. And she says, no. I need this box. I need you to go get this box. And I'm like, the box is irrelevant. We have to go. Like, the doctor, they're waiting for you. And she says, no, I need this box. So I give her this box, and I'm a little frustrated because, they're waiting. We have called the hospital and they're waiting for her. And she opens the box. And in the UCC, when you get a position like this, there's a special service that effectively installs you into the role. And the color for installation is red. And so my grandmother, I open this box for her, and she pulls out a red dress. And she said, I want you to know, and it always kind of makes me choke up. And she says, I want you to know I already talked to God. And so I ordered my dress so that when your installation happens, I'm ready. And here is this moment with this 85-year-old woman now who doesn't know all the details of an interview process. She doesn't know all the hoops. I'm effectively, when that moment happened, I haven't gotten the job. I haven't been installed. Like, there were still 2 months worth of things, but she had already ordered her dress. And I think, and I think it's that. So it's like, I talked to God about that you needed help. God sent the man. Who am I to question that? I talked to God about this job, and yes, it's this big job and all that, but I ordered my dress.
You're very fortunate. I mean, you're fortunate on so many levels because, one of the things that my old dear mother always regretted is that she came to England instead of going to the United States. And she knew that the intelligent people such as she was back in 1952 went to America, but she came to England to marry my father and ended up stuck here. And part of we don't have the issues that you have in America, but what you do have that I miss personally, and just listening to your story and, seeing the people on the videos talking, and just having been to America many times, is you have a real strong sense of community. You have a real strong
Mm.
sense of Black people who still want to be with each other, who still want to
Yeah.
love each other. And we don't have that here. I recently spent 6 years in West Africa working. I got my dream job. I took a big advertising job, went to Ghana, and I was working there for 6 years. I came back in 2017. And, one of the things that struck me was in the 6 years that I'd been away, I came back. God, you think I'm a big racist, but it's not that. And, there's something like 70% of the British-born Black men have white partners.
Mm.
And it's like, I don't care who people choose to love, but when you do that to that extent, there's something seriously going wrong.
Yeah.
And we see it all over the country, and it's really quite sad. It means that so many of us feel kind of displaced. We don't have a place to be. We don't really have communities anymore, because we are so discouraged from being with each other. So even if you're
Right.
walking the street with another Black person, people are like, they're panicking, they're trying to cross the road, and they only feel safe if you're with a white person. They feel that you are somehow tamed.
Hmm.
And I miss that in America you don't have to behave in those ways. And you can have someone like yourself getting a job like this. We would find it very difficult to do that here for
Yeah.
so many reasons. But I mean, I want to say congratulations.
Oh, thank you
I
very
want to
much.
say thank you for doing this with me today. And yeah, I will make something of this and speak to you again very soon, let you know what it is. And I would appreciate if you have, maybe give me a week, a couple of photographs perhaps
Yeah.
that we could use to illustrate the piece.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, sure. And then I'll extend the invitation that if you ever find yourself in Bloomfield, Connecticut, or really New York, because we're 2 hours from New York, in my new home, there will be a guest room with your name on it,
oh my
Paul.
goodness.
So just know that you are you're more than welcome. I've
People,
appreciated your time.
I've said to people, I have a very good friend of mine, Patrick McCoy, who lives in Chicago. He's a wonderful art collector. You may have heard of him, or your friends may have heard of him. And I met him once here about probably 30 years ago. I met him in a pub, and he came home, we spent some time together, and he said, if you're ever in Chicago, and about a year later, I turned up and knocked on his door, and he was so surprised. But he's one of my favorite people in the world. I mean, we come and we see each other all the time, but don't say that if you don't mean it, because I
I
will.
mean it, 100%. Yeah.
As long as you get rid of Trump, I'll be there.
Yes, hopefully that's coming.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you,
Thank you
Paul.
very much. Thank you very
All
much.
right.
You have a wonderful day, and I'll.
You too.
Bye bye.